The delivery that set everything in motion. The morning was unremarkable, the kind of day that gives no hint of the chaos to come. In the heart of a bustling city, where skyscrapers loomed over crowded streets and car horns played an unending symphony, Elijah Carter began his day, as he always did, with purpose. He climbed into his delivery truck, the worn seat creaking beneath him, and took a deep breath. Another day, another set of deliveries. Elijah was a man of quiet strength, his presence calm yet commanding. He wore the uniform of a delivery driver, a navy blue shirt neatly pressed, matching trousers, and sturdy boots. Despite the simplicity of his appearance, there was a certain dignity in the way he carried himself. He wasn't just a man with a job. He was a man on a mission. His first stop of the day was at the Crescent's Table, an upscale restaurant that catered to the city's elite. Known for its exquisite cuisine and snobbish staff, the place was infamous for its intolerance toward anyone who didn't match their air of exclusivity. Elijah had delivered to them before, and though he found the atmosphere grating, he always did his work with professionalism. Pulling into the narrow alley behind the restaurant, Elijah parked the truck and stepped out. He surveyed the back entrance, a sleek metal door with no markings save for the restaurant's logo etched in gold. The polished surface reflected the morning sunlight, a sharp contrast to the dingy alley it was set in. Elijah retrieved the boxes from the truck. Inside them were the restaurant's prized ingredients, organic produce from a local farm, and a selection of imported seafood. As he stacked them carefully onto his dolly, he caught snippets of laughter coming from inside. The sound wasn't joyful or kind. It carried a sharp edge of mockery. Pushing the dolly to the door, Elijah knocked twice. The laughter ceased. Moments later, the door swung open, and a young man in a crisp chef's jacket stared at him, his expression a mix of annoyance and disdain. "You're late," the man snapped, though Elijah was right on time. Elijah held up the invoice without a word. He had learned long ago that silence could speak louder than any rebuttal. The chef snatched the paper, barely glancing at it. "Just bring it in and keep out of the way. We're busy." As Elijah maneuvered the dolly into the kitchen, he felt the weight of the staff's stares. Conversations paused, and whispers began to ripple through the room like a low hum. Some openly smirked. Others turned their noses up, as if his mere presence sullied the air. "Delivery guy doesn't look like he belongs in a place like this," someone muttered loud enough for him to hear. Elijah ignored the comment, focusing on his task. Years in the business had thickened his skin, but it didn't make the words sting any less. He began unloading the boxes, his movements deliberate and precise. "Hey, don't block the walkway," barked a woman in a tailored suit. She didn't look up from her clipboard as she passed by, her tone sharp and dismissive. "Yes, ma'am," Elijah replied evenly. Nearby, two waiters folded napkins at a gleaming countertop. One of them glanced at Elijah, nudging his coworker with a smirk. "Think he even knows what half the stuff in those boxes is?" The other snickered. "Doubt it. Probably doesn't even know how to pronounce half the menu." Elijah paused for a moment, his hands gripping the edges of a box. He considered saying something but decided against it. Instead, he placed the box down gently, ensuring it was aligned perfectly with the others. As he worked, the comments continued, small jabs meant to belittle, words laced with arrogance. They thought he was invisible, a background character in their world of fine dining and self-importance. But Elijah wasn't invisible. He was watching, listening, and taking mental notes. When he returned to his truck for the next load, the laughter inside grew louder. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. Elijah took a deep breath, his fingers tightening around the dolly's handle. He had dealt with this before, and he would deal with it again. Back in the kitchen, the head chef, a sharp-featured man named Aaron, was inspecting the ingredients Elijah had delivered. Aaron's nose wrinkled as he opened a crate of seafood. "Is this the best they could send?" he muttered, his voice dripping with disdain. Elijah stepped forward. "If there's an issue, I can call the supplier." "Don't bother," Aaron interrupted with a wave of his hand. "Just leave it, and get out of the way." Elijah's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He focused on unloading the boxes, his movements steady despite the growing tension in the room. "Careful, delivery guy," one of the line cooks called out. "Wouldn't want you to drop something expensive." Another round of laughter followed. Elijah kept his head down, his patience stretched thin but unbroken. He was here to do a job, and he would see it through. When the final box was unloaded, Elijah handed the signed invoice to Aaron. The chef barely glanced at him as he scribbled his signature. "You can go now," Aaron said curtly. Elijah paused, his eyes meeting Aaron's. For a moment, the room fell silent, the weight of unspoken words hanging in the air. Then, with a calm voice, he said, "Have a good day." As he turned to leave, one of the waiters muttered, "Yeah, go back to wherever you came from." Elijah stopped in his tracks, his hand resting on the door handle. Slowly, he turned to face the room. His gaze was steady, his expression unreadable. "I came here," he said, his voice firm, "to deliver something this place clearly needs more of. Respect." The room fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in. Elijah held their gaze for a moment longer, then walked out, his footsteps echoing in the quiet. Outside, Elijah leaned against his truck, taking a moment to collect himself. The delivery was over, but the real work was just beginning. What the staff didn't know, what none of them could have imagined, was that Elijah wasn't just a delivery driver. He was the owner of the Crescent's table, and he had just gotten a first-hand look at the culture he was about to change. The unveiling of hidden truths. As Elijah drove away from the restaurant, the weight of the morning hung heavy on his shoulders. The city streets blurred into a mix of honking cars and towering glass buildings, but his mind was elsewhere, focused, calculating. His tablet sat in the passenger seat, the glowing screen displaying a calendar reminder. Meeting with the Crescent's table staff, 3:00 p.m. Elijah had made a deliberate choice to keep his ownership of the restaurant under wraps. For weeks he had watched, observed, and gathered intel. He wanted to understand the people who ran the place, to see how they treated those they deemed beneath them. Today, he had seen enough. The staff didn't just lack respect for him as a delivery driver. They lacked respect for anyone they viewed as less than themselves. Elijah's role as owner wasn't about status or power. It was about proving a point and building something bigger. He wasn't here to play games. He was here to change the narrative. By early afternoon, the restaurant buzzed with activity as the staff prepared for the evening rush. The dining room was immaculate, tables set with fine china, crystal glasses catching the light from the chandeliers. Servers moved briskly, ensuring everything was perfect for the clientele that would arrive in a few hours. In the kitchen, however, the atmosphere was tense. Aaron, the head chef, stood at his station, barking orders. His sharp voice cut through the air like a blade. "Where's the garnish for the foie gras?" he demanded. "And someone tell me why the seafood isn't prepped yet." A young line cook scrambled to respond, her hands trembling as she worked on a cutting board. I'm on it, chef." Aaron scoffed. "On it isn't good enough. We have standards here." Nearby, the restaurant manager, Greg, paced nervously. The mysterious meeting scheduled for 3:00 p.m. loomed over him. He had no details, only the vague instruction to gather the entire staff in the dining room. The new owner's arrival had been shrouded in secrecy, and Greg didn't like surprises, especially not when the staff was already on edge. At precisely 2:45 p.m., Elijah arrived, his demeanor calm but resolute. He parked his delivery truck discreetly around the corner and walked toward the restaurant's front entrance. Today, he wasn't just a delivery driver. Today, he was stepping into his role as the leader this place desperately needed. Dressed in the same uniform he had worn that morning, Elijah entered through the front doors, the polished wood and gold accents of the lobby contrasting sharply with the simplicity of his attire. The hostess at the podium looked up, confusion flickering across her face. Can I help you?" she asked hesitantly. "I'm here for the meeting," Elijah said with a polite nod. The hostess tilted her head, clearly unsure how to respond, but before she could say anything, Greg appeared, his expression a mix of relief and unease. "Mr. Reynolds," Greg asked, his voice low, "are you sure you want to go in like that?" Elijah's eyes met Greg's. "I'm sure." Greg hesitated, then nodded. "The staff is gathering in the dining room now. They're not expecting this." Elijah offered a faint smile. "That's the point." By 3:00 p.m., the dining room was packed with staff, their faces reflecting a mix of curiosity and impatience. Servers whispered to one another, line cooks exchanged confused glances, and Aaron leaned against a table, arms crossed, and an irritated smirk on his face. "This better not be a waste of time," Aaron muttered to no one in particular. "We've got prep work to do." When the doors opened and Elijah stepped inside, the room fell silent. At first, the staff didn't recognize him. To them, he was just the delivery driver from that morning, the man they had mocked and dismissed. Confusion rippled through the group as they exchanged puzzled looks. "What's he doing here?" one server whispered. Aaron's smirk grew wider. "Seriously? Who let him in?" Elijah walked to the center of the room, his posture calm and composed. He took a moment to let the silence settle, meeting their gazes one by one. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady and clear. "My name is Elijah Reynolds," he began, "and as of 3 weeks ago, I am the new owner of the Crescent's table." The room erupted into a stunned silence, the shock on their faces almost palpable. Aaron's smirk vanished instantly, replaced by wide-eyed disbelief. Servers shifted uncomfortably, and line cooks suddenly found the floor more interesting than Elijah's piercing gaze. "You're joking," Aaron blurted out, his voice tinged with incredulity. Elijah's expression didn't waver. "Do I look like I'm joking, chef?" Aaron opened his mouth to respond, but quickly shut it again, his usual bravado evaporating under Elijah's calm scrutiny. Elijah continued, his tone unwavering. "This morning, I came here as a delivery driver. I didn't announce who I was because I wanted to see how this team operates when they think no one's watching. What I saw was disappointing." He let the words hang in the air, the weight of his disappointment pressing down on the room. "I saw arrogance," he said, his gaze shifting to Aaron. "I saw disrespect." His eyes moved to the waitstaff. "And I saw people who think their job titles give them the right to look down on others." The staff remained silent, their earlier confidence replaced by discomfort and shame. Even Aaron, who was rarely at a loss for words, stayed quiet. Elijah took a step forward, his voice softening but losing none of its intensity. "I started my career as a dishwasher in a small diner. I worked my way up, one job at a time. I know what it's like to scrub floors, to carry boxes, to do the work that keeps a place like this running. And let me tell you something, every role matters." He paused, letting his words sink in. "The way you treated me today wasn't just disrespectful to me. It was disrespectful to the values this restaurant should stand for. And that's going to change." A line cook raised his hand hesitantly. "Change? How?" Elijah's gaze softened slightly. "By building a culture of respect, accountability, and teamwork. Starting today, this restaurant will not be a place where arrogance thrives. It will be a place where every person, guest, staff, or delivery driver, is treated with dignity." Aaron cleared his throat, his voice shaky. I didn't mean." Elijah cut him off with a raised hand. "Actions speak louder than words, chef. If you're willing to change, prove it." He turned to the rest of the staff. "The same goes for all of you. If you're not on board with this vision, you're welcome to leave. But if you choose to stay, you'll be held to a higher standard. Because this isn't just my restaurant, it's our restaurant. And together, we can make it something extraordinary." The room stayed silent, the weight of Elijah's words settling over them like a heavy blanket. For the first time, the staff saw him not as a delivery driver, not even as their boss, but as a man who embodied the principles he demanded from them. As Elijah left the dining room, the staff remained seated, their minds racing with thoughts of the morning's events and the man who had just turned their world upside down. They had come face to face with their own biases, and now they had a choice to make: cling to their old ways or rise to the challenge Elijah had set before them. The ripples of realization. The dining room of the Crescent's table remained eerily quiet long after Elijah had walked out. The usual hustle and bustle were replaced with an awkward stillness as the staff tried to process what had just happened. Aaron, the head chef who usually dominated the room with his voice and presence, sat motionless, his hands clasped together on the table in front of him. The silence was broken by a server named Mia, who spoke hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper. Did that really just happen? Aaron, still staring at the table, muttered, "I can't believe it. That guy was the owner." Another server, Lucas, shifted uncomfortably. "I mean, he was delivering boxes this morning. How are we supposed to know?" Mia turned to him, her brows furrowed. "It's not about knowing. It's about how we treated him. We were awful." Lucas looked away, his face flushed. Around the room, heads nodded reluctantly. They all knew Mia was right. Their actions, their words, their laughter. It was all a stark reminder of the toxic culture that had festered in the restaurant. In the kitchen, the usual rhythm was off. The clinking of pots and pans was subdued, conversations reduced to murmurs. Even Aaron, who normally barked orders with an iron will, seemed hesitant. He walked over to Greg, the restaurant manager, his movements uncharacteristically slow. "We're going to lose people over this," Aaron said quietly. Greg raised an eyebrow. "Lose people? What do you mean?" Aaron let out a frustrated sigh. "You heard what Elijah said. He's going to hold everyone to a higher standard. A lot of the staff. They're not used to that. They've gotten comfortable." Greg crossed his arms. Comfortable or complacent? Aaron didn't answer. He didn't need to. They both knew the truth. Meanwhile, Elijah sat in his modest office on the second floor of the restaurant, a space he had kept intentionally simple. He had no interest in extravagant decor or symbols of wealth. His focus was on the people and the mission. He opened his laptop, pulling up a detailed report he had been compiling over the past 3 weeks. It outlined everything he had observed: the strengths, the weaknesses, and the toxic patterns that had taken root in the restaurant's culture. The morning's events had confirmed what he already knew. This wasn't just a staff problem. It was a leadership problem. Aaron, despite his talent in the kitchen, had fostered an environment of arrogance and fear. Greg, though competent, had failed to address the cracks in the system. And the rest of the staff? They had followed suit, mirroring the behaviors they saw at the top. Elijah leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the desk. Change wouldn't come easily, but he had faced tougher challenges before. His mind drifted back to his early days as a dishwasher, scrubbing plates in the back of a rundown diner, while dreaming of something greater. Those dreams had fueled his journey, and now they fueled his determination to make the Crescent's table a place that reflected the values he held dear. Later that evening, the restaurant was in full swing. The dining room was filled with the chatter of patrons, the clinking of glasses, and the hum of subdued music. Servers moved swiftly between tables, their movements precise and polished. But behind the scenes, the tension was palpable. Aaron stood at his station, his sharp eyes scanning the kitchen. He barked a few orders, but his voice lacked its usual edge. He was distracted, his thoughts circling back to Elijah's words. For years, Aaron had prided himself on his authority, on the power he wielded in the kitchen. But now that authority felt hollow. In the staff lounge, Mia sat on a worn leather couch, her head in her hands. Lucas sat beside her, fidgeting with his tie. "I can't stop thinking about what he said," Mia admitted. "About respect." Lucas sighed. "Yeah, I mean, I've said some pretty stupid things. This morning, I was awful. Mia looked up at him. But we can change, right? I mean, that's what he wants. For us to be better. Lucas nodded slowly. Yeah, but it's not going to be easy. Mia smiled faintly. Nothing worth doing ever is. By the time the restaurant closed for the night, Elijah was back in the dining room, waiting for the staff to gather. His presence was calm but commanding, a quiet reminder that things were different now. As the staff trickled in, the room filled with an air of unease. No one quite knew what to expect. When everyone was seated, Elijah stood at the head of the room, his hands resting lightly on the back of a chair. I want to thank you all for your hard work tonight, he began. His tone was measured, his gaze steady. I know today has been a lot, but this is just the beginning. He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. I want to make something clear. I'm not here to tear anyone down. I'm here to build something better. But that's going to take effort from all of us. Elijah turned to Aaron, meeting his eyes. Chef, you're talented. There's no denying that. But talent isn't enough. Leadership isn't about commanding respect. It's about earning it. And that starts with how you treat the people around you. Aaron swallowed hard but nodded. Understood. Elijah shifted his gaze to Greg. Greg, you've been with this restaurant for a long time. You know its history better than anyone. But knowing the past isn't enough. You have to shape the future. Greg nodded, his face serious. I'll do my best. Finally, Elijah addressed the entire staff. Every one of you has a role to play in this change. It won't happen overnight, and it won't be easy. But if we're willing to put in the work, we can create something extraordinary. The room was silent, the weight of Elijah's words settling over the staff. For the first time, they saw him not just as their boss, but as a man who believed in their potential, even when they hadn't believed in it themselves. As the meeting ended and the staff dispersed, Elijah lingered in the empty dining room, his thoughts a mix of hope and determination. He knew the road ahead would be challenging, but he also knew it was worth it. Because at the heart of the Crescent's table wasn't just fine dining. It was the people who made it all possible, breaking the old mold. The following morning, Elijah was up before dawn, his mind already focused on the changes he needed to implement. Change didn't come easily to anyone, especially in a place where bad habits had taken root for years. He knew that his words the day before had struck a chord, but words alone wouldn't be enough. Action was required. Elijah walked into the Crescent's table through the back entrance, the same way he had entered as a delivery driver just 24 hours earlier. The polished silver doors gleamed in the early light, a stark reminder of the restaurant's pretentious facade. He had chosen this place not for what it was, but for what it could become. In the kitchen, the morning prep team was already hard at work. Knives clattered against cutting boards, pots bubbled on the stovetop, and the air was filled with the aroma of simmering stock and freshly baked bread. But there was an undercurrent of tension, a sense that everyone was watching their step, unsure of how to proceed in this new era. Aaron, the head chef, was among them, his usually commanding voice quieter, his movements less assertive. Elijah observed him from the doorway for a moment before stepping inside. "Morning, chef," Elijah said casually, his tone warm but deliberate. Aaron glanced up, startled. "Morning, Mr. Reynolds." Elijah raised an eyebrow. "Elijah, let's keep it informal." Aaron nodded quickly, wiping his hands on a towel. "Elijah, what brings you down here?" "I'll be spending more time in the kitchen," Elijah replied, his gaze sweeping over the team. "I want to see how things operate firsthand, and I'm here to help where I can." Aaron's brow furrowed. "Help? You mean work with us?" "That's right," Elijah said with a faint smile. "I've done every job in a kitchen at some point. Today, I'll start wherever you need me." The team exchanged uncertain glances, unsure how to react. It wasn't every day that the owner of a high-end restaurant offered to roll up his sleeves and work alongside the staff. But Elijah wasn't just any owner. The first few hours of the morning passed with a mix of surprise and awkwardness. Elijah took on simple tasks, chopping vegetables, cleaning counters, and assisting with inventory checks. He didn't impose or lecture. He simply worked, his actions speaking louder than words. At one point, Aaron pulled him aside, his expression hesitant. "Why are you doing this? You don't need to, be down here." Elijah met Aaron's gaze, his voice calm but firm. "Leadership isn't about sitting in an office, Aaron. It's about understanding your team and earning their respect. If I'm asking all of you to change, I need to show that I'm willing to do the same." Aaron nodded slowly, his usual bravado replaced by a quiet sense of humility. For the first time, he saw Elijah not as a threat, but as an ally. By midday, Elijah called the entire staff into the dining room for a meeting. The team filed in, their faces a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Elijah stood at the front, a large whiteboard behind him filled with notes and diagrams. "Today, we're going to start building a new foundation for this restaurant," Elijah began, his voice steady and confident. "This isn't just about food or service. It's about culture. And culture starts with values." He turned to the whiteboard, where 3 words were written in bold letters: respect, accountability, excellence. "These aren't just words," Elijah said, pointing to each one. "They're principles that will guide everything we do. Respect means treating everyone, guests, colleagues, suppliers, with dignity. Accountability means taking ownership of your actions, whether they're good or bad. And excellence means striving to be better every single day." Mia, the server who had been deeply affected by Elijah's words the day before, raised her hand. "How do we change? I mean, we've been doing things a certain way for so long. It's hard to just stop." Elijah nodded, appreciating her honesty. Change doesn't happen overnight. It's a process, but it starts with awareness, recognizing the habits that need to be broken and making a conscious effort to do better. He paused, scanning the room. "I'm not expecting perfection. I'm expecting progress. And I'll be right here with you every step of the way." Over the next week, the changes began to take shape. Elijah introduced team-building exercises, starting with something simple, a shared meal at the end of each shift. At first, the idea was met with skepticism. The staff was used to clocking out and leaving as soon as their work was done. But Elijah insisted. "We can't build a strong team if we don't know each other," he explained. "Breaking bread together is one of the oldest ways to build trust." The first shared meal was awkward. Conversations were stilted, and the tension in the air was palpable. But as the week went on, barriers began to break down. Mia discovered that Lucas, the server she often bickered with, had a passion for baking. Aaron learned that one of his line cooks, a quiet man named Carlos, had once been a sous chef in a renowned restaurant before personal struggles derailed his career. Elijah watched these moments of connection with quiet satisfaction. He knew that these small steps were laying the groundwork for something bigger. But not everyone embraced the changes. A few staff members, resistant to the new culture, chose to leave. Among them was a sous chef who had been particularly dismissive of Elijah during his delivery driver ruse. Though Elijah regretted losing anyone, he understood that not everyone would be willing to adapt. "It's better this way," Greg said one evening as they reviewed the staff roster. "The ones who stay are the ones who want to be here." Elijah nodded. "We're not just building a restaurant. We're building a team. And that starts with people who believe in the vision." By the end of the week, the atmosphere in the Crescent's table had shifted noticeably. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, and old habits were hard to break. But there was a sense of hope, a feeling that things could be different. Elijah stood in the dining room one evening, watching the staff work. Aaron was at the pass, calling out orders with a tone that was firm but respectful. Maya and Lucas moved through the dining room with synchronized precision, their interactions with each other and the guests warm and genuine. Even Greg, who had been hesitant about the changes, seemed more energized. For the first time, Elijah saw a glimpse of the future he had envisioned, a restaurant not defined by its exclusivity, but by its excellence, not driven by arrogance, but by integrity. As he leaned against the bar, Elijah allowed himself a small smile. The road ahead was still long, but for the first time, he felt confident that they were on the right path. Resistance and revelation. The transformation at the Crescent's table was underway, but progress was neither swift nor easy. While some of the staff embraced the new culture, others resisted it, clinging to the familiar ways of the past. For Elijah, these were the moments that tested his resolve the most. Change was never linear. It came in waves, with each one uncovering new challenges. The resistance became evident one afternoon during a particularly busy prep session in the kitchen. Aaron was at his station, overseeing the team as they prepared for a fully booked evening. The air was thick with tension, pots clanging and knives flashing as the line cooks scrambled to meet the demands of the menu. Carlos, the quiet but skilled line cook who had slowly been regaining his confidence under Elijah's leadership, was working on a delicate reduction sauce. His movements were precise, his focus unyielding, until one of the sous chefs, Marcus, stepped in. "You're taking too long," Marcus snapped, leaning over Carlos's station. "We don't have time for perfection. Just get it done." Carlos flinched but kept working, his hand steady despite the sharpness of Marcus's words. Before Elijah could step in, Aaron's voice cut through the tension. "Marcus," Aaron said sharply, "back off. Carlos knows what he's doing." Marcus turned, his face twisting in frustration. "We're under pressure, chef. We don't have time for this slow pace." Elijah, who had been observing from the edge of the kitchen, finally stepped forward. "Pressure doesn't excuse disrespect," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Carlos is following the standards we set. If he needs time to do it right, he'll get it." The room fell silent, the staff exchanging uneasy glances. Marcus's face flushed, but he didn't argue further. He muttered something under his breath and returned to his station, leaving Carlos to finish his work. Elijah turned to Aaron, his expression thoughtful. "We need to address this," he said quietly. "It's not just Marcus. There's still an undercurrent of resistance here." Aaron nodded, his usual bravado replaced by a sense of accountability. "I'll talk to him, and anyone else who's struggling with the changes." "Good," Elijah replied. "But remember, it's not just about pointing out the problems. It's about helping them see the bigger picture." That evening, Elijah gathered the staff for a meeting after the last guest had left. The dining room, usually filled with laughter and conversation, was quiet as the team settled into their seats. The tension from earlier in the day lingered in the air. Elijah stood at the front, his hands resting lightly on the back of a chair. He took a moment to study the faces before him. Some weary, some defiant, but most simply uncertain. "I know this week has been hard," Elijah began, his voice steady. "Change always is. But I need all of you to understand why we're doing this." He turned to the whiteboard he had used earlier in the week, where the words respect, accountability, excellence were still written in bold letters. "These aren't just words," he said, pointing to the board. "They're the foundation of everything we're trying to build here. But foundations don't build themselves. It takes effort, patience, and a willingness to grow." Elijah's gaze shifted to Marcus, whose expression was guarded. "Marcus, I know you're frustrated. You're used to a certain pace, a certain way of doing things. But the way we've been operating isn't sustainable. Not for the staff, and not for the restaurant." Marcus hesitated, then spoke, his tone defensive. "I just want things to run smoothly. And sometimes that means pushing people." "I understand that," Elijah replied. "But there's a difference between pushing for excellence and pushing people down." Carlos wasn't being slow. He was being thorough. And that thoroughness is what sets us apart. Marcus looked away, but Elijah could see the words beginning to sink in. The following day, Elijah implemented a new initiative, rotating leadership. Each team member, regardless of their position, would take turns leading a task or project. The idea was met with mixed reactions. Some saw it as an opportunity, while others viewed it as unnecessary. For Carlos, it was a turning point. When it was his turn to lead, Aaron assigned him the task of designing a new plating concept for one of their signature dishes. It was a challenge that required both creativity and confidence, two things Carlos had struggled with since his career setback. Elijah watched from the sidelines as Carlos presented his concept to the team. His voice wavered at first, but as he explained his vision, a quiet confidence emerged. The design was intricate yet practical, a balance of artistry and efficiency. Even Marcus, who had been skeptical, nodded in approval. When the plating was tested during the evening service, it received rave reviews from the guests. For Carlos, it was a moment of redemption, a reminder that he was more than his past mistakes. As the weeks went on, the changes at the Crescent's table became more apparent. The resistance didn't disappear overnight, but it softened, replaced by a growing sense of unity. The shared meals became a cherished ritual, a time for the team to connect and reflect on their progress. Mia and Lucas, once adversaries, became unlikely allies, often partnering on challenging tasks. Marcus, though still rough around the edges, began to show a willingness to adapt. And Aaron, who had initially resisted Elijah's hands-on approach, became one of his strongest supporters. One evening, after a particularly busy service, Aaron approached Elijah in the office. He hesitated in the doorway, his usual confidence replaced by a rare vulnerability. "Got a minute?" Aaron asked. "Always," Elijah replied, gesturing for him to sit. Aaron settled into the chair, his hands clasped tightly. "I've been thinking about what you said, about leadership. And, you're right, I haven't been leading, I've been dictating. That's not who I want to be." Elijah leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "Acknowledging it is the first step. The next is figuring out how to change." Aaron nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I think I've already started." By the end of the month, the Crescent's table was almost unrecognizable, not in its decor or menu, but in its energy. The staff moved with a newfound sense of purpose, their interactions marked by mutual respect and support. Guests began to notice the change, praising not just the food but the warmth of the atmosphere. For Elijah, it was a reminder of why he had taken on this challenge in the first place. The Crescent's table wasn't just a restaurant. It was a testament to the power of respect, accountability, and excellence. And though the journey was far from over, he knew they were heading in the right direction. The turning point. The transformation of the Crescent's table had been a slow and deliberate process, but by the 6th week, the changes were undeniable. The restaurant had evolved into more than just a high-end dining establishment. It had become a beacon of teamwork, humility, and excellence. Yet, for Elijah, the journey wasn't over. True change required constant effort, and he wasn't one to rest on his laurels. The evening began like any other. The dining room buzzed with the chatter of guests, the clinking of glasses, and the soft melodies of live piano music. The golden light from the chandeliers bathed the room in a warm glow, creating an atmosphere of elegance and comfort. Elijah stood near the entrance, observing the flow of the evening. He wasn't wearing a suit or a chef's jacket. Instead, he had opted for simple attire, a button-down shirt and slacks. He wanted to remain approachable, a constant reminder to his team that leadership wasn't about appearances but about action. From his vantage point, he could see the fruits of their labor. Mia greeted a couple at the door with genuine warmth, escorting them to their table with a grace that spoke of newfound confidence. Lucas moved through the dining room, balancing plates with practiced ease, his once hesitant smile now a permanent fixture. Even Marcus, who had resisted change so vehemently at first, worked seamlessly alongside Carlos in the open kitchen, their movements synchronized like a well-rehearsed dance. For a moment, Elijah allowed himself to savor the sight. This was the vision he had carried with him since the day he purchased the restaurant, a team united by purpose, a culture rooted in respect. But as the night wore on, a new challenge arose. A high-profile food critic, known for her scathing reviews, had booked a table under an alias. Elijah had caught wind of her visit earlier that day and decided to keep the information to himself. He didn't want the staff to be nervous or overcompensate. He wanted them to succeed on their own merit. The critic, a woman in her mid-40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, was seated at a table near the center of the room. She observed everything: the plating, the service, even the subtle nuances of the staff's interactions. Aaron, aware of the importance of every dish that left the kitchen, was in his element. He called out orders with precision, his voice steady but encouraging. Table 6, ready in 3 minutes. Carlos, make sure that reduction is perfect. Carlos nodded, his focus unbroken as he carefully spooned the sauce onto a plate. Aaron inspected the dish before giving it a nod of approval. Send it out. Mia approached the critic's table with the plate in hand. Her steps were measured, her posture confident. She placed the dish in front of the critic with a smile. Your main course, ma'am. Please let us know if there's anything else you need. The critic gave a curt nod, her attention already fixed on the food. Maya stepped back, her calm exterior masking the slight flutter of nerves in her chest. In the kitchen, Elijah stood beside Aaron, watching the team work. How do you feel about tonight? He asked. Aaron glanced at him, a hint of a smile on his face. We've done everything we can. Now it's up to the guests. Elijah nodded. That's the right attitude. But remember, it's not just about the food. It's about the experience. And from what I've seen tonight, this team is delivering on both. Aaron's smile widened slightly, a rare moment of pride shining through. We've come a long way. That we have, Elijah agreed. As the night progressed, the critic finished her meal and requested to speak with the chef. Aaron hesitated for a moment before stepping out of the kitchen, his chef's jacket pristine and his demeanor composed. You wanted to see me? Aaron asked, approaching her table. The critic studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Yes, I wanted to compliment you on the meal. The flavors were balanced, the presentation impeccable. It's clear you've put thought into every detail. Aaron blinked, momentarily taken aback. Praise from a critic of her caliber was rare. Thank you. That means a lot. The critic's sharp gaze softened slightly. But what impressed me most wasn't the food, it was the atmosphere. There's a sense of camaraderie here, a warmth that's hard to find in places like this. It elevates the dining experience. Aaron smiled, a genuine, unguarded expression. That's a team effort. Everyone here plays a part. The critic nodded, her lips curving into a faint smile. It shows. Keep it up. After the critic left, the staff gathered in the dining room for their nightly debrief. The energy was high, the usual post-service fatigue replaced by a buzz of excitement. Elijah stood at the center of the group, his hands in his pockets. Tonight was a success, he began, his voice carrying over the chatter. Not just because of the food or the service, but because of the way you work together. That's what makes this place special. Mia raised her hand, a grin on her face. Did you see how she smiled at Aaron? I don't think I've ever seen a critic smile like that. The room erupted in laughter, and Aaron rolled his eyes good-naturedly. All right. Let's not get carried away. Elijah chuckled, then raised a hand to quiet the group. In all seriousness, tonight was a testament to what we can achieve when we put respect and teamwork first. But remember, this is just the beginning. We can always be better. The staff nodded, their faces reflecting a mix of pride and determination. They knew the road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, but for the first time, They felt ready to face whatever challenges came their way. Later that night, as the staff trickled out one by one, Elijah lingered in the empty dining room. He walked slowly between the tables, his fingers grazing the polished surfaces. The journey to this moment had been long and arduous, but it had been worth every step. He paused near the window, looking out at the city lights. In the reflection, he saw the faint outline of the restaurant behind him, a space transformed not by money or status, but by the people who filled it with purpose. For Elijah, the Crescent's table was more than just a restaurant. It was a symbol of what could be achieved when people chose to see the best in one another. And as he turned off the lights and stepped into the cool night air, he knew that this was only the beginning of an even greater story. The legacy of change. Elijah locked the doors to the Crescent's table, the city's noise muffled behind him as he stepped into the quiet of the alleyway. The night air was crisp, carrying with it a sense of accomplishment. But his mind, ever forward-thinking, already wandered to the next challenge. He had seen remarkable progress in the team, yet he knew that sustaining it would require constant vigilance. The following morning, Elijah arrived at the restaurant earlier than usual. The staff wouldn't be in for hours, and the stillness of the space gave him time to reflect. He walked through the dining room, his footsteps echoing softly on the polished floors, and paused at a table by the window. It was the same table where the critic had dined the night before. Sitting down, he let his gaze drift over the room. Every detail, the lighting, the arrangement of tables, the scent of fresh flowers, was intentional, a reflection of the values he had worked to instill. This wasn't just a place where people came to eat. It was a place where people connected, where stories unfolded, where respect thrived. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the back door opening. Turning, he saw Aaron walking in, carrying a large envelope. The chef looked surprised to see him. "Didn't expect you this early," Aaron said, setting the envelope on the table. "Couldn't sleep," Elijah admitted with a faint smile. "Too much on my mind." Aaron nodded, pulling out a chair to join him. "What's next? I mean, we've come a long way, but I know you're not the type to sit back and coast." Elijah chuckled. "You know me too well, chef." Aaron's expression turned serious. "The team feels different now, better. But I've been thinking, how do we keep it that way? What stops us from slipping back into old habits?" Elijah leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. "It's about consistency. Culture isn't something you build once and forget about. It's something you nurture every single day. That means holding each other accountable, celebrating the small wins, and staying true to the values we've set." Aaron nodded thoughtfully. "It's a lot of work." "It is," Elijah agreed, "but the reward is worth it." Aaron hesitated, then added, "You've changed the way I think about leadership. I used to believe it was about being the loudest voice in the room, the one everyone feared. But you've shown me it's about something else entirely. It's about trust." Elijah smiled, a genuine, warm expression. "That's a lesson I learned the hard way. I'm glad it's resonated." By the time the staff arrived, the air was buzzing with energy. The critic's positive review had already been published online, and the phone was ringing non-stop with reservation requests. The article praised the restaurant's food, service, and, most importantly, the sense of community that set it apart from other fine dining establishments. As the team gathered in the kitchen for their daily briefing, Elijah stood at the center, his presence calm but commanding. "I want to congratulate all of you on last night's success," he began, his voice steady. The critic's review was glowing, but more than that, it captured what makes this place special. All of you. He paused, letting his words sink in. This restaurant isn't just about food. It's about people, our guests, our team, and the way we treat one another. That's what sets us apart, and that's what will carry us forward. The staff broke into applause, their faces glowing with pride. Even Marcus, who had been one of the most resistant to change, joined in, a small but genuine smile on his face. In the weeks that followed, The Crescent's table continued to thrive. The staff grew closer, their bond solidified by shared purpose and mutual respect. Guests noticed the change, often commenting on the warmth and authenticity of the experience. The restaurant's reputation soared, and with it came opportunities for expansion. Elijah, however, was cautious. Growth was important, but not at the expense of the values they had worked so hard to establish. He made it clear to his team that every decision would be guided by their core principles: respect, accountability, excellence. Months later, Elijah stood outside the restaurant, watching as a new sign was unveiled. It wasn't flashy or ostentatious, but it reflected everything the restaurant had become. Below the name The Crescent's Table, in elegant script, were the words "A place for everyone." As the staff gathered around him, Elijah felt a profound sense of fulfillment. This wasn't just a restaurant anymore. It was a legacy, a testament to the power of perseverance, humility, and community. Aaron stepped up beside him, his voice filled with quiet pride. "You did it, Elijah." "We did it," Elijah corrected, his gaze sweeping over the team. "This was never about me. It was always about us." The staff cheered, their voices ringing out into the evening air. And as Elijah stood among them, he realized that the greatest success wasn't the restaurant's glowing reviews or packed reservations. It was the people who had grown, changed, and risen to meet the challenge. The Crescent's Table was more than a fine dining establishment now. It was a symbol of what was possible when people came together, cast aside their egos, and built something extraordinary. And for Elijah, it was only the beginning.